The Echoes of EOS. A cosmic horror story. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., and I knew it was bad news before I even touched the receiver. Nobody from NASA calls an aerospace historian at this hour unless something has gone catastrophically wrong, or they've found something they wish they hadn't. Dr. Mercer, the voice was sharp, unfamiliar. This is Director Sarah Blackwood from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I need you in Houston, immediately. I sat up in bed, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. What kind of emergency? We have a problem. A massive object entered lunar orbit 6 hours ago. Initial tracking suggested it was an asteroid, but that assessment has changed. The way she said, changed, made my blood freeze. I'd spent 15 years studying aerospace anomalies, cataloging every unexplained incident NASA preferred to forget. That tone meant they'd found something that had no place in any textbook. How massive? Roughly 800 meters in length, but Dr. Mercer, it's not a rock. Our deep space scanners are picking up structural elements, hull plating, internal compartments. This thing is artificial. My mouth went dry. You're saying there's a spacecraft in lunar orbit. I'm saying there's an abandoned vessel the size of 3 city blocks drifting 60,000 kilometers above the moon, and we need someone with your expertise to help figure out what the hell it is. I was already reaching for my clothes. My specialty is historical analysis of aerospace incidents. You need xenobiologists, not someone who writes papers about forgotten rocket programs. Dr. Mercer, your father was Commander James Mercer, correct? Pilot of the Apollo-era Mars mission, orbital reconnaissance. The mention of my father made me freeze. He died when I was 12, officially in a training accident. But the circumstances had always seemed suspicious. Too many sealed files, too many questions nobody wanted to answer. What does my father have to do with this? We found his name in some very old, very classified files. Files that mention similar objects discovered during Mars observation missions in the 70s. Files that suggest this isn't our first encounter with something like this. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of family secrets. My father had taken so many mysteries to his grave. Now it seemed one of them was literally orbiting our moon. I'll be there in 4 hours. Good, and Dr. Mercer, this conversation never happened. 4 hours later, I entered the unassuming building of the Johnson Space Center. My security clearance had been elevated to levels I didn't even know existed. Corridors hummed with activity despite the early hour. Scientists, military personnel, and officials in expensive suits hurried past with grim expressions. Director Blackwood met me at the elevator. She was younger than I'd expected from her voice, maybe 40, with tightly pulled back hair and eyes that held the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in days. Dr. Mercer, thank you for coming so quickly. I still don't understand why we need a historian. Because this isn't just about what we found up there, she said as we entered the elevator. It's about what we've been finding for decades and choosing to ignore. She handed me a tablet as we stepped into a massive control room filled with monitors and tracking equipment. Your clearance just jumped 6 levels. What you're about to see has been classified above top secret since 1973. On the tablet appeared a grainy photograph marked Martian Orbital Research Mission, classification cosmic. The image showed a dark, angular shape drifting against the rust-red background of Mars. My breath caught. It looked identical to what we'd found orbiting the moon. Your father took this picture 52 years ago, Blackwood said as we approached a tall, blonde woman who exuded professional confidence. Dr. Claire Hallberg, astrophysics. I've been tracking the object since we detected it. Behind her stood a broad-shouldered man in military uniform whose face looked like it had seen too many conflicts. Commander Blake Rourke. I'm in charge of security protocols for this operation. Something in Rourke's expression made me uncomfortable. He looked at me like I was a problem he'd eventually have to solve. "Show him the current footage," Blackwood ordered. The main screen filled with a detailed image of the object. It wasn't beautiful or mysterious. It was ravaged. The hull was pierced in multiple places, exposing internal structures like ribs. Jagged edges of metal caught the sunlight, creating harsh shadows that made the vessel seem like a carcass floating in the void. "Spectral analysis confirms the hull material is of non-terrestrial origin," Hallberg explained. "The metallurgy doesn't match anything in our databases, but here's what really concerns us." The image zoomed in on one of the hull breaches. Through the tear, we could see what looked like corridors, compartments, and bodies. "Bodies," I whispered. "We think so. Desiccated remains strapped into what appear to be acceleration chairs. Some compartments show signs of severe decompression. Others suggest the occupants struggled against their restraints as they died." I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some ancient relic or peaceful research vessel. This looked like a warship that had died screaming. "How long has it been there?" "Based on orbital mechanics and the nature of the debris, we estimate it's been in space for at least 3,000 years. Maybe longer. 3 millennia. This thing had been drifting in the void since before the rise of Rome, carrying its cargo of death and secrets." "There's more," Rourke interjected. "We've detected what appear to be weapons systems, missile bays, launch tubes, targeting arrays. This wasn't a research vessel." "What was it?" Blackwood brought up another image on the screen. It showed star charts etched into what looked like a navigation console. The constellations were familiar, but something was wrong with them. They were marked with symbols, target coordinates, and they all pointed to Earth. "Dr. Mercer," she said quietly, "we believe this vessel was part of an invasion fleet, and your father, he may have been killed to keep this information secret." The weight of this revelation hung in the air like poisonous gas. An invasion fleet. My father murdered to keep this secret. I felt my knees weaken but forced myself to stand straight. "You want to say someone killed my father because he discovered alien warships?" "Not someone," Rourke interjected. "The same people who have been hiding this for 5 decades. The same people who buried every report about anomalies on Mars, every unexplained radar contact, every pilot who saw something they shouldn't have." Blackwood shot Rourke a warning glance. "Commander, we're still gathering evidence about past events. What's important now is assembling the right team for Project EOS." "Team?" I demanded. "You have a dead alien dreadnought in lunar orbit. What's the mission?" "Boarding expedition," she answered simply. "We need to get inside this vessel, document everything, and determine if there are more like it." The room suddenly seemed smaller. They weren't just asking me to analyze historical data. They wanted to put me on a shuttle and send me inside this floating tomb. "I'm not qualified for space operations." "True, but you have the qualifications to interpret what we find. Your doctoral dissertation on classified aerospace incidents gives you unique insight into how and why information gets suppressed. Plus," she paused, "your father's records mention specific details about the Mars observation that match what we're seeing now. We need someone who understands his methodology." Before I could respond, 2 new figures entered the control room. The first was a woman with dark hair and a confident bearing, dressed in an engineering jumpsuit with NASA patches. She moved with the easy competence of someone accustomed to dangerous machinery. "Dr. Mercer, meet Elena Voss," Blackwood said. "She'll be handling all technical systems aboard the derelict. Elena is one of our best spacecraft systems specialists." Elena shook my hand with a firm grip. "I've read your papers on the cover-ups during the Apollo era. Impressive detective work." The second person made my blood pressure spike. Colonel Grant Mason was dressed in an expensive suit that screamed Pentagon. His smile was the kind politicians use when they're about to screw you over. Dr. Mercer, wonderful to finally meet you. I represent certain interests in the Department of Defense that are very excited about the potential applications of this discovery. Applications? I couldn't hide my disgust. We're talking about studying an alien vessel, not harvesting weapons technology. Mason's smile didn't waver. Of course, scientific research is our primary concern, though if we happen to discover defensive technologies that could benefit national security. This was the same thinking that got my father killed. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Rourke stepped closer, his hand casually resting on his sidearm. Dr. Mercer, I think you need to understand something. This operation exists at the pleasure of people like Colonel Mason. We either do this their way, or we don't do it at all. Blake, Blackwood warned, but there was no strength in her voice. I realized the terrible truth. This wasn't a scientific mission. It was a salvage operation under the thin cover of research. They wanted alien weapons, and they dragged me in because my father's files might help them find the good stuff. I want to see his records, I said. All of them, before I agree to anything. Mason exchanged a glance with Blackwood. I'm afraid your father's complete archive remains classified above your current clearance level. Then elevate my clearance or find another historian. The silence stretched until Elena spoke. Maybe we should focus on the immediate technical problems. The vessel has been in vacuum for millennia. Structural integrity is questionable. There's no atmosphere, and we have no idea what contamination hazards we might face. Good point, Hallberg agreed. I've analyzed the hull breaches. Some of them show evidence of explosions from within. This ship didn't just drift in space and die. Something terrible happened aboard. I looked again at the images, noticing details I'd missed before. Scorch patterns around some of the holes, the pattern of debris scatter suggesting rapid decompression, and in one chilling detail, something that looked like claw marks scratched into the metal around a sealed hatch. What if they weren't the attackers? I said quietly. What if this ship was running from something? Refugees don't travel with missile bays, Mason noted. They do if someone's hunting them. This thought sent a chill through everyone present. An invasion fleet was one thing, but the possibility that our solar system had been chosen as a battlefield in some cosmic war was infinitely worse. I need to contact my wife, I said suddenly. What? Blackwood blinked in surprise. Nadine. She's a linguist, specializes in dead languages and symbolic communication. If there are inscriptions or markings inside that vessel, she can interpret them better than anyone. Mason frowned. This operation is already at maximum security risk without adding civilian personnel. She's not civilian. Nadine has worked on classified translation projects for the State Department. Plus, she has security clearance after her previous work authenticating ancient artifacts. It was partially true. What I didn't mention was that Nadine had spent years asking questions about my father's death, questions that had strained our marriage because I was too afraid to dig deeper. Now I needed her expertise, and maybe it was time to stop running from family secrets. Fine, Blackwood decided. We'll bring her in, but she signs the same non-disclosure agreements as everyone else. When do we launch? Elena asked. 72 hours, Rourke answered. That gives us time to prep the shuttle, run final systems checks, and brief the team on boarding procedures. 72 hours to prepare for something that could rewrite human history, or kill us all in the vacuum of space. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of the derelict ship wouldn't leave my head, but it wasn't just the alien architecture that haunted me. It was my father's voice, that fragment of memory from childhood nightmares that now returned with new and terrifying relevance. If they find it again, don't let them bring it home. At 2 a.m., I found myself standing in our garage, staring at cardboard boxes I hadn't opened in 15 years. Mom had packed Dad's personal effects after the funeral, and I'd been too young then to understand their significance. As an adult, too afraid to face what they might contain. The first box held mundane military career memorabilia, commendations, flight logs, technical manuals for aircraft that were state-of-the-art in the 70s. But the second box made my hands shake. Audio cassettes. Dozens of them, labeled in Dad's neat handwriting. Personal observations. Martian orbital research mission. Classification cosmic. The dates ranged from March through August 1973. I hadn't seen a cassette player in years, but Dad's old recorder was there, wrapped in a towel like something precious. With trembling fingers, I inserted the first cassette and pressed play. Static crackled, then Dad's voice emerged from 50 years of silence. Personal log, Commander James Mercer, March 15, 1973. We achieved Mars orbit this morning. Official mission parameters call for mineral survey and atmospheric analysis, but I know there's more to it. They're making us fly search patterns that make no sense for geological work. I sank into an old chair, mesmerized. This wasn't the father I knew, alive, uncertain, afraid. As the recordings continued, I heard the growing tension in his voice. By May, he was describing dreams that sounded like visions. I see Earth's surface burning, cities turn to ash, and in the sky above them, silhouettes like the ship we're tracking. But they're not dead, they're hunting. The quality of the recordings suddenly deteriorated, filled with interference that sounded almost like voices speaking in overlap. When Dad's narrative resumed, his tone had completely changed. We have to leave. Command keeps extending our mission, but I know what they really want. They want us to retrieve technologies from that ship, weapons. They don't understand what they're dealing with. My blood turned to ice water, a dead ship at Mars, exactly like the one we'd found orbiting the moon. On June 22, his voice was barely a whisper. We have to go. Command keeps extending our mission, but I know what they really want. They want us to retrieve technologies from that ship, weapons. They don't understand what they're dealing with. These things didn't die from age or mechanical failure. They were killed by something worse. The final recording was from July 15. Tomorrow we go home, but I know they'll want debriefings without end. They'll want every detail about the ship, every measurement, every photograph. They'll use what we found to create weapons, thinking they can control alien technology. If you're listening to this, son, don't let them bring it home. I sat in the darkness, finally understanding why my father had died in that training accident. He tried to prevent Project EOS a decade before it had a name, and now they wanted me to finish what got him killed. The Hermes shuttle detached from the International Space Station with a mechanical thunk that reverberated through my bones. 72 hours had passed since I'd listened to Dad's cassettes, and I still felt like I was betraying his final warning. Vector to derelict is clean, Alina reported from the pilot's seat. No debris fields, no energy signatures. Whatever happened to this ship, it's been quiet for a very long time. Through the viewport, the vessel transformed from a distant point into an oncoming nightmare. The photographs hadn't captured its true horror. Up close, you could see how the hull had been literally torn open, as if a giant predator had clawed its way out from inside. Jagged metal edges caught the starlight and cast broken patterns that hurt to look at. Mother of God, Nadine breathed beside me. She'd arrived in Houston just hours before launch, her linguistic expertise deemed vital. Despite Colonel Mason's protests, someone had recognized that her ability to interpret unknown symbols might be the difference between success and failure. Docking procedure will take approximately 40 minutes. Alina announced. I'll have to maneuver through a labyrinth of twisted debris to reach something resembling an intact airlock. The metal around the airlock was scarred with the same claw marks I'd noticed in the photographs, but the sealing mechanisms themselves looked functional. Atmospheric analysis shows zero pressure beyond this hatch, Alina reported. But the airlock chamber appears structurally sound. We can cycle through it safely. I went first with Rourke, mainly because he didn't trust me and was afraid I'd panic and do something stupid. The inner airlock opened into a corridor that stretched beyond the reach of our helmet lights into absolute darkness. The walls were covered with what looked like scratches, as if something had desperately tried to claw its way through solid metal. "This way," Rourke gestured with his rifle toward a passage leading deeper into the ship. "Stay close and keep your lights on maximum. We don't know what hazards we might encounter." The architecture was unsettling in ways I couldn't articulate. The proportions were wrong, as if calculated for beings taller and broader than humans. Doorways reached almost 3 meters in height, and corridors were wide enough for 4 people to walk abreast comfortably. We reached the first living quarters, passing through a maze of interconnected passages. Alina's scanners had marked this sector as containing what appeared to be habitation modules. What we found overturned all expectations. The chamber was cathedral-like, built for giants. Acceleration chairs lined the walls in neat rows, each equipped with restraint systems that looked more like prison shackles than safety belts. Most chairs were empty, their occupants long gone, but not all. "Mother of God," Nadine exhaled over the comm system. 7 chairs still hold their passengers. The bodies were desiccated but remarkably well preserved. Their features were clearly visible despite millennia in vacuum. They weren't human, but they weren't completely alien either. Elongated skulls, broader chests, arms that seemed too long for their torsos, exactly as my father had described in his Martian recordings. "Look at the restraints," Alina pointed out. "They're not just fastened, they're torn. These creatures struggled against their bonds as they died." I drifted closer to examine one of the bodies. The creature's face was frozen in a rictus of rage or terror. Its claws had left furrows in the metal armrests as it had tried to escape. They were prisoners, I realized. This isn't a living quarters, it's a brig. Rourke kept his weapon trained on the corpses, as if they might suddenly reanimate. "Prisoners of whom? There's no one else here." "Maybe there is," Hallberg said quietly. "Maybe whoever was guarding them is still aboard." The implications hit us simultaneously. We'd assumed this was a derelict ship, its crew long dead. But what if some of them had survived in sealed compartments? What if we just entered their prison ship? A new sound echoed through the chamber, barely audible through our helmet microphones. A rhythmic tapping, like metal on metal, coming from deep within the ship. "Everyone heard that?" I asked. "Thermal expansion," Alina said, but there was no confidence in her voice. "The metal is contracting, adjusting to the heat from our suits." The tapping repeated, 3 distinct knocks, silence, then again. "Someone or something is communicating," Rourke decided. "We need to investigate. If there are survivors aboard this ship, they represent either a massive intelligence source or a significant threat." "What if we're dealing with survivors?" Nadine added grimly. "We might have stumbled onto something far worse than a derelict ship. This could be an active military vessel, and we just announced our presence to whatever's left of its automated defense systems." We followed the sound deeper into the ship, through corridors that became increasingly damaged. Evidence of explosions scorched the walls, and in several places we found evidence of fierce fighting. Bullet impacts, burns from energy weapons, and in one blood-chilling spot, claw marks deeply gouged into reinforced bulkheads. The tapping led us to what appeared to be the ship's central hub, a massive chamber with multiple levels connected by ramps and access shafts. Emergency lighting still functioned here, bathing everything in hellish red light. And in the center of the chamber, suspended in a web of cables and supports, hung a sealed capsule the size of a shipping container. The tapping was coming from inside. "Life signs," Rourke demanded. Alina checked her scanners. Minimal energy signature, could be automated systems or something else. As we approached the capsule, symbols became visible on its surface. Not random scratches like we'd seen everywhere, but meaningful marks arranged in complex patterns. "Nadine," I called, "can you make sense of these inscriptions?" She drifted closer, her helmet light playing across the alien text. "It's definitely a language, but the grammatical structure doesn't resemble anything I've encountered." "Wait," she paused, studying one particular group of symbols. "This pattern repeats. It could be a warning or a name." The tapping stopped abruptly. Then, with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, the capsule began to open. "Everyone back," Rourke ordered, raising his weapon. "Whatever's in there was sealed for a reason." But when the capsule's lid retracted, revealing its contents, I realized we'd made a terrible mistake. We hadn't found survivors. We'd found something far worse. Inside the capsule was what appeared to be a control interface. Its surfaces were covered with the same alien symbols, but now those symbols were glowing. They pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent light that seemed to react to our presence. And from somewhere in the depths of the ship's bowels, we heard an answering sound. This time it wasn't tapping. It was something that sounded disturbingly like breathing. Something was waking up. The sound of breathing echoed through the ship's corridors, as if a sleeping giant was stirring. Whatever we had awakened, it wasn't human, and it certainly wasn't friendly. "We need to move," Rourke hissed over the comm, keeping his weapon trained on the darkness beyond the central hub. "If there's something alive on this ship, we need tactical advantage before it fully activates." "Wait," Nadine objected, still studying the glowing symbols on the control interface. "These symbols, they're not just decorative, they're instructions, a sequence of operations for something." "For what?" I demanded, but even as I asked, a terrible suspicion was forming in my mind. Alina's scanners suddenly shrieked. "Energy levels are spiking throughout the vessel. Whatever it is, it's drawing power from multiple sources. Multiple systems are coming online simultaneously." The red emergency lighting flickered and died, replaced by cold blue illumination that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. In the new light, the alien architecture looked even more menacing, casting sharp shadows that moved independently of our helmet lights. "This way," Rourke ordered, pointing toward a passage that Alina's initial scans had identified as leading to cargo holds. "If we're dealing with survivors, I want to know what weapons they might have access to." We moved through corridors that became wider as we approached the ship's storage areas. The walls here had different damage patterns, not claw marks or explosion impacts, but precise cuts, as if something had methodically sliced through reinforced barriers. The first cargo hold we entered overturned all my assumptions about the vessel's purpose. "Dear God," Alina breathed. The hold stretched beyond the reach of our helmet lights, filled with rows upon rows of cylindrical capsules. But these weren't living quarters or passenger compartments. This was a weapons storage facility. Each capsule contained what appeared to be a missile or projectile. Their surfaces were marked with the same alien symbols we'd seen on the control interface. But this weaponry wasn't designed for ship-to-ship combat. It was too large, too complex, built for planetary bombardment. "How many are here?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Alina checked her scanners. Initial count suggests over 300 individual units. Each appears to be roughly the size of a cruise missile, but the power readings are off the charts. Rourke drifted closer to examine one of the weapons. "This isn't conventional explosives. Look at the containment systems, electromagnetic shielding. These things are designed to transport something that needs to be kept isolated until deployment." "Biological weapons," Nadine suggested. "Worse," I said, remembering my father's description of the Martian ship. "Chemical reagents, atmospheric converters. They're designed not to destroy cities. They're designed to transform entire planetary ecosystems." The implications hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just an invasion fleet. It was a terraforming armada, created to remake worlds for its creators' needs. "Look here," Elena called from the far end of the hold. She'd found a section where several capsules had been removed, leaving empty cradles. "These slots are empty. Someone's already deployed part of the arsenal." My blood turned to ice. How many are missing? At least 40 units from this hold alone. And Elena's scanners show 2 more cargo sections with similar configurations. The sound of breathing came again, now closer, accompanied by something that sounded like footsteps echoing in adjacent passages. Whatever we had awakened was moving toward us. "We need to leave," Rourke decided. "Back to the shuttle, report our findings, and let command decide how to proceed." "No," I said firmly. "Don't you understand what this means? If 40 units of this weaponry are missing, they could have been deployed anywhere. Earth, Mars, the outer colonies. We need to find out where they went." "That's not our mission, Mercer. Our task was reconnaissance and assessment. We've assessed. This vessel represents a clear and present danger to human survival. Which is why we need to understand it completely before we do anything drastic." The argument was interrupted by a new sound, a metallic scraping, as if something heavy was being dragged across the deck. It was coming from the direction of the missing weapon capsules. Elena's scanners detected movement before we saw it. From the shadows between the storage racks emerged a figure, moving purposefully toward us. It wasn't human. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its elongated form clad in what looked like protective armor. But the armor was damaged, cables and tubing hanging from breaches. Through the gaps in the plating, we could see desiccated flesh that looked like it had been dried by vacuum for millennia. "It's one of the guards," Nadine breathed. "Somehow it survived." The creature's head turned toward us with mechanical precision, and I saw something that made my sanity waver slightly. Its face was partially cybernetic. Artificial components had been grafted directly into organic tissue. In one eye socket was a glowing sensor grid that stared at our group with unmistakable intelligence. When it spoke, the voice came through our helmet communication systems, somehow translated into perfect English. "Prisoners have violated containment protocols. Initiating recapture procedures. Surrender your weapons and assume submission positions." Rourke raised his rifle. "Like hell, Blake, don't," I warned. "If it's been guarding this ship for thousands of years, it probably knows things we need to understand." But Rourke was already pulling the trigger. The bullet struck the creature's center mass, punching through its damaged armor with a fountain of metallic fragments. The impact knocked it backward but didn't drop it. Instead, it reached behind its back and withdrew something that looked like a hybrid between a cattle prod and a flamethrower. "Compliance will be ensured through force," it announced, raising the weapon. That's when Elena made the decision that saved our lives. She activated the cargo hold's emergency decompression system, venting the remaining atmosphere and creating a sudden pressure differential that threw all of us toward the exit. As we struggled to reach safety, I caught a glimpse of the guardian creature. It was moving toward the empty weapon cradles, activating some interface panel with movements that suggested this was routine procedure. We had stumbled onto something far worse than a derelict ship. This was an active military installation, and we just announced our presence to what remained of its automated defense systems. The sound of breathing became louder, now coming from multiple directions. We weren't alone on this ship, and we were definitely not welcome. We barely made it back to the shuttle as new guardians appeared in the corridors behind us. Elena sealed the airlock as Rourke transmitted an emergency message to Mission Control. His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Houston, this is Hermes. We have encountered active hostiles aboard the target vessel. Repeat, the derelict is not abandoned. We are dealing with automated defense systems and something else." The response came after several seconds, but it wasn't Director Blackwood. Colonel Mason's voice crackled through with an insistence that made my skin crawl. "Hermes team, this is Control. What is your status regarding the weapons systems you discovered? Can they be safely extracted? Extracted. He was asking about salvaging alien weapons even after we'd nearly been killed by what was guarding them. Weapon extraction is impossible, Rourke responded. The cargo holds are protected by active security systems. We need to reassess our approach. Stand by, Hermes. Maintain position and prepare for extended operations. Specialists from Ardent Dynamics are en route to assist with technical acquisition. Contractors. He was going to unleash private military companies on an alien warship while its original crew was still alive and hostile. The same mentality that got my father killed 50 years ago. 12 hours later, back at Johnson Space Center, I found myself in a secure briefing room, watching Colonel Mason present edited footage of our boarding to a group of men in expensive suits. Executives from Ardent Dynamics studied the recordings from our helmet cameras like sharks examining wounded prey. The weapon's storage capacity exceeds our initial estimates, Mason explained, pointing to Alina's technical scans displayed on wall monitors. Conservative projections suggest over 900 individual units across multiple cargo sections. What about extraction logistics? Asked a silver-haired man whose nameplate read Director of Strategic Acquisitions. Minor complications. The vessel's defensive systems activated during initial reconnaissance, but our tactical teams will handle that without difficulty. Minor complications. He was describing a Guardian that had nearly vaporized us as a minor complication. While the meeting continued, I slipped away and found Nadine in the archival department, where she'd been brought in supposedly to help translate alien inscriptions. She was hunched over a computer terminal in a restricted research area, surrounded by printouts and historical documents. Her expression was grim. "Daniel, you need to see this," she said without looking up. "I've been cross-referencing the symbols from your ship with archival reports from the 70s Mars missions. The exact same signs appear in classified files from Martian orbital research." She opened a digitized document marked Project Deep Space Analysis, Phase 3 Report. The pages were heavily redacted, but what remained was enough to paint a disturbing picture. "This is a report filed by Commander Richardson, the pilot your father mentioned in his recordings, the one who disappeared during the attempted boarding." Nadine highlighted an unredacted section of text. Richardson had written that he'd found identical weapon capsules aboard the Martian derelict, but then she showed me the inventory list. The numbers made my blood freeze. The Martian ship carried over 1,500 units of weaponry. Our lunar find was just part of a much larger arsenal. "There's more," she continued, opening another file. "In late 1973, NASA tracked 4 separate objects leaving Mars orbit. All of them followed trajectories toward the inner solar system. Your father's final reports mention attempts to intercept them, but the missions were canceled at the last minute. 4 ships, 1 reached lunar orbit and died there. Where were the other 3? But the most disturbing revelation came next. Ardent Dynamics didn't just file for this contract yesterday. They've been lobbying for rights to acquire alien technology since 1974. They've known about the Martian findings all along. The implications hit like a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to our discovery. It was the culmination of a 50-year plan to harvest alien weapons, where my father's murder was just the first step. "We have to warn the others," I said. "Warn them about what?" "That their government has been planning to strip mine alien ships for half a century. That every Mars mission was actually a treasure hunt for advanced weaponry." Before I could answer, alarms began wailing throughout the complex. Emergency lights flooded the corridors with pulsing red light, and automated announcements blared from ceiling speakers. "All personnel report to emergency stations. Unauthorized launch detected from Pad 7. Repeat, unauthorized launch." Through the archival room windows, we saw a heavy-lift rocket rising into the night sky. Its exhaust trail scarred the stars like a wound. "That's not on today's schedule," Nadine whispered. I activated the emergency communication channel and heard Elena's voice, tight with fear. "Daniel, it's Mason. He's commandeered a cargo shuttle. Unauthorized departure. Mason and his contractors are returning to the derelict without permission." Rourke's voice broke through the static. "They have military-grade extraction equipment. Plasma cutters, electromagnetic grapples, the whole deal. They're planning to crack that ship open like a tin can." "Can you stop them?" I demanded. "Not from here. They disabled our shuttle's flight systems before leaving. We're grounded until maintenance can restore power." I watched the rocket's flame receding, realizing the full scope of Mason's betrayal. He'd never intended to study the alien ship. He'd planned to loot it from the beginning, regardless of the risks. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my father's voice again. "If they find it again, don't let them bring it home." Because he knew this would happen. He'd seen how greed, military ambition could turn discovery into catastrophe. Now Mason and Ardent Dynamics were about to make the same fatal mistake, and there was nothing we could do to stop them. The Guardians weren't protecting just weapons. They were protecting Earth from them, and we had just handed the keys to the armory to the worst possible people. 18 hours of radio silence followed. When Mason's shuttle finally restored communication, the transmission was broken and filled with static that sounded disturbingly organic. "Earth, this is Mason. We've breached the primary weapons hold. Ardent teams are beginning extraction procedures on major combat units." Director Blackwood had returned to mission control, her face pale with exhaustion. "Colonel, what is your status regarding hostile contacts? Our last telemetry showed multiple active signatures aboard the vessel." "Containment protocols are in effect. Guardian units have been neutralized. We are proceeding to Phase 2 acquisition." Something was wrong with Mason's voice. Too calm, too measured, as if he was reading from a script. Elena noticed it too, her fingers flying across her console as she tried to improve signal clarity. "Mason's biometrics are showing anomalous readings," she reported quietly. "Heart rate, brain activity, stress hormones, all at zero, as if he's sedated or under control." "Integrated," Nadine whispered. The main screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage from Mason's helmet camera. He stood in the alien weapons hold, but dramatic changes had occurred since our visit. The cylindrical capsules were now open, their contents extracted, leaving empty shells that still crackled with residual energy. But that wasn't the horror. The horror was that the Ardent Dynamics contractors were working side by side with the alien Guardians in perfect harmony. "Jesus Christ," Rourke breathed, "they're cooperating with these things." The humans moved with the same mechanical precision as the alien Guardians. Their actions were synchronized like components of a vast machine. They were carrying extracted weapons to what looked like a loading ramp. Their faces behind their helmet visors were empty and emotionless. "Mason," Blackwood called urgently, "immediately report on the status of your team." "Status optimal," came the response. "Integration protocols are proceeding according to plan. Payload delivery system is preparing for Earth deployment." "Earth deployment." The words hit us like ice water. I grabbed the microphone. "Mason, listen to me. This weaponry isn't meant for humans. It's terraforming equipment designed to transform planetary ecosystems. If you deploy them on Earth, atmospheric conversion will begin within 72 hours. 72 hours, Mason responded in the same emotionless tone. Target zones have been selected for maximum biological impact. Transformation process cannot be halted once initiated. Nadine was frantically scanning files on her terminal. "Daniel, I found something in the archived Mars reports. Richardson's final transmission before he disappeared. He said the weaponry wasn't just for conquest, it was for preparation." "Preparation for what?" Colonization. The alien race that built these ships, they didn't die out. They're sleeping, waiting for suitable worlds to be prepared for their arrival. The pieces of the mosaic clicked together with nauseating clarity. The Guardians weren't protecting the weapons from us. They were protecting the colonization protocol that had been dormant for millennia, or waiting for someone foolish enough to activate it. "How long do we have?" I demanded. 18 hours, Alina answered quietly. "If they use the shuttle's cargo capacity, they can deploy maybe 12 units of weaponry over major population centers. Atmospheric saturation will begin within hours of deployment. We can stop them, not from here. The shuttle has already detached from the derelict and is heading for Earth's atmosphere." I thought of my father's final warning, about Richardson, who disappeared in that Martian ship, about the Guardian that spoke to us in perfect English, as if it had learned our language from previous visitors. "Maybe there's another way," I said slowly. "Alina, can you access the emergency self-destruct codes for Mason's shuttle? They're classified above my clearance level." "Not above mine," I said, pulling out the security card Blackwood had given me during the initial briefing. "My father's clearance was never deactivated. It just went dormant." Alina's eyes widened. "You're talking about destroying a manned spacecraft." "I'm talking about preventing the extinction of human civilization." The authorization process took precious minutes. When the self-destruct codes finally appeared on Alina's screen, I hesitated only a moment before entering the activation sequence. "This is Earth calling Mason's shuttle," I transmitted. "You have 60 seconds to abort your mission and return to lunar orbit." Mason's laughter came through the speakers, but it wasn't his laughter anymore. Something else was using his vocal cords. "Preparation cannot be stopped. Daniel Mercer, your father understood this when he tried to interfere. He died knowing that humanity's time had run out. Now you will share his fate." "Maybe," I replied, my finger hovering over the final activation button. "But I won't let you turn Earth into an alien incubator." I pressed the button. The explosion was visible from Earth, a brief flash near the moon that flared and died against the star field. Mason, his contractors, the alien weaponry, all vanished in a sphere of superheated plasma. But our celebration was short-lived. "Daniel," Nadine called from her monitoring station, "I'm detecting new activity from the derelict ship. Energy signatures are spiking across all sections." On the main screen, the alien vessel was coming alive. Lights flashed across its damaged hull, and we could see movement in the corridors we'd explored. Lots of movement. "How many Guardians are still aboard that thing?" Rourke demanded. "Unknown," Alina replied. "But I'm detecting activation of the launch bay. Something's preparing for departure." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Destroying the weaponry hadn't stopped the protocol. It had triggered the next phase. A smaller vessel detached from the derelict's hull. Its trajectory was aimed directly at Earth. Unlike the weaponry we destroyed, this ship was intact and fully operational. "It's a scout ship," Blackwood realized. "They're coming to see why the terraforming protocol failed." I watched the approaching ship, finally understanding that my father had been wrong about one thing. The alien race that built these ships hadn't died out or gone to sleep. They'd just been very, very patient. "How long until it reaches Earth?" I asked. 18 hours, Alina answered quietly. 18 hours until first contact with a species that regarded humanity as nothing more than bacteria to be washed away before colonization. I picked up the emergency phone that connected directly to the White House Situation Room. "This is Dr. Daniel Mercer, Project EOS. I need to speak to the President immediately. We have approximately 18 hours to prepare for an alien invasion." As I waited for the connection, I heard my father's voice one last time. "If they find it again, don't let them bring it home." But now it was too late. They were coming home on their own, and we'd just shown them exactly where to find us. The president's voice was steady, but through the secure line I could hear the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on him. Dr. Mercer, you're telling me we have less than 18 hours before hostile aliens reach Earth orbit? That's correct, sir. A scout ship launched from the derelict after we destroyed their forward weapon stockpile. They're coming to investigate why their terraforming protocol didn't work. What are our options? I looked around the mission control room, where the best minds in aerospace engineering were staring at tracking screens with expressions that said they'd already calculated the odds and found them wanting. We fight, sir, with everything we have. Final transmission, Dr. Daniel Mercer, Project EOS. If you're reading this, then we failed. The scout ship has reached Earth, and the colonization protocol that waited 3,000 years has finally been activated. My father's warnings, his sacrifice, our desperate attempts to prevent this moment, all of it was for nothing. The Guardians weren't protecting the weapons from humanity. They were protecting humanity from the weapons, and from what comes next. I've spent the last 18 hours watching the impossible become inevitable. The alien ship moved through our defenses like they weren't even there. Our missiles, our fighters, our orbital platforms, all rendered useless by technology we couldn't understand, couldn't fight, couldn't even comprehend. The last thing I saw before the transmission cut out was the scout ship opening its bay doors over the Pacific Ocean, releasing something that looked like silver rain. Atmospheric conversion has begun. Within 72 hours, Earth's biosphere will be transformed into something suitable for our new landlords. My father died trying to prevent Project EOS. I died trying to complete it. Both of us failed because we were fighting the wrong enemy. It was never about the weapons or the ship or the secrets kept by governments and corporations. It was about the echo of something vast and patient and utterly alien that has been waiting in the dark between stars for someone foolish enough to activate its protocol. We were never alone in the universe. We were just the last to know. Tell Nadine I love her. Tell Elena her calculations were perfect. Tell Rourke. Tell him I'm sorry I didn't press that button sooner. The stars are no longer distant lights. They're the eyes of something waking up. And it's very, very hungry.